Welcome to the Diabetes Matters podcast. This new series is all about why diabetes matters, because it does. Not just to the 280,000 people living with diabetes, but to all New Zealanders. We're talking to inspirational Kiwis, sports stars, experts, and people with diabetes to find out what matters and why. Well, kia ora, I'm Monique Bradley, and in this episode, we're talking all about why language matters, which will focus on the power of words and how the language we use can make our diabetes whānau feel valued, understood and supported, or misunderstood, excluded and stigmatised. Words are powerful, and the words we choose to talk to or about people with diabetes are important, especially when they're our friends or whānau. Even the words people with diabetes use to talk about themselves can have a huge impact. For today's episode, we are joined by three amazing wahine who are all have a story to share about diabetes and language matters. So let's introduce our guests. First of all on the couch today, Rosemary Hall, an endocrinologist working and supporting people with all types of diabetes. She's also a diabetes researcher and president of the New Zealand Society for the Study of Diabetes. Kia ora and welcome.
Kia ora, thank you.
Lovely to have you here. Now also on the couch, Ruby McGill, very well known to many people with diabetes here in New Zealand. She has type 1 diabetes, is a passionate advocate for people with type 1 and former director of Youth for Diabetes New Zealand. Kia ora, welcome.
Kia ora, thanks for having me.
So good to have you here. And finally on the couch today, Megan Whelan has type 2 diabetes. She works in the media for Radio New Zealand and has authored opinion pieces for Stuff about her personal experience of living with diabetes in New Zealand. Lovely to have you here. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Right, so we are going to break it up. There's a lot of voices here today, a lot of opinions, I'm sure. So we will break it up into sections with time at the very end for a quick panel roundup of today's discussion. So Rosemary, I'm going to start with you. First of all, from your experience, why does language matter to people with diabetes?
Language matters for people with diabetes for every component of diagnosis, of care, of living well with diabetes. It's absolutely important that we use the most appropriate language to be respectful and to really just verify that people are the expert of their diabetes, and we are there as healthcare professionals to help people along their journey, not as people to, provide any kind of language that might provide stigma or reduce the importance of an individual.
So in your work as an endocrinologist, you see many people with diabetes. How do the words or phrases that people with diabetes hear affect their behaviour and even their overall health?
So I think, it comes in many different forms, and the words that people with diabetes hear come from their whānau, it comes from the community, it comes from the media, and most frighteningly comes from healthcare professionals. We are doing this to our own people, really. And, traditionally we have used awful words for people, or for all patients. There's always been talk of people being compliant or not compliant, or, not being interested, not turning up for appointments because they, don't really care, or, those sorts of phrases, which is just absolutely terrible. And we've had in many places, and I really, really hope that this is changing, and certainly in my practice it is, people, really being undervalued, and people living with diabetes being undervalued in their contribution to the consultation that we're having when we're talking about their management of diabetes, but also, this kind of very old-fashioned idea that we as healthcare professionals should tell you what you should be doing, and that is never, that's happened all through centuries, really. But it's what we have actively tried to change. So, helping to manage somebody living with diabetes is a relationship, and we need to be respectful and reciprocal in that relationship, so that we can ensure that when we are helping to provide care for somebody with diabetes, that we are doing it so that they can live well with diabetes, and we can try and adapt medicines or technology or any of the things that we can provide as healthcare professionals to ensure that it fits in well with their life.
Beautifully put. Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. So let's talk about stress and anxiety, because it's very, very real. Very real for everybody, and I think bigger for people dealing with a condition like this. So I've heard many people with diabetes have increased stress and anxiety as a result of negative language. So what impact does stress have on managing diabetes?
Well, stress has many different effects. I mean, I guess the first initial one is that any kind of stressful environment can immediately put up your blood sugars, and of course that's the thing that people with diabetes are managing on a moment-by-moment, day-to-day basis. So any kind of stress can do that, whether it's immediate stress, that the fear of being run over by a car or something sort of right here and now, or much longer, much more sort of involved stress that might be relationship stress or work stress or running a marathon stress, or all of those kind of things will all have a direct impact on your glucose level at this point in time. And of course, one of the main things that we are looking for when we're thinking about somebody living well with diabetes is glucose, but it's not the only thing. We are always thinking about a whole multitude of different factors to ensure that people do live well with diabetes.
So it's more of a holistic overview.
Absolutely, yeah. And then, of course, the other thing about stress is that, if you provide a stressful environment as a healthcare professional, nobody's going to come back, And we know that if people don't come back, if people don't have a good supportive relationship with a healthcare professional, then that leads to an increased rate of complications later on, And of course, people aren't going to turn up if they come and get told that they have been bad or they have been neglectful of themselves or they've not done the right things, or, all of those things that can be said either very openly or insinuated, that nobody's going to come back and see you, And so the most important thing for helping to manage somebody live with diabetes is that they come back and see you.
That creating that space for a supportive relationship.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. So what are the most common things that you see and hear that have really affected people with diabetes, and why do you think that's happening?
I think it happens for all sorts of reasons. It happens because we are used to using these words and don't even think, when we use them. It happens because it's very present within communities, within the media, within people's whānau, and within the public's perception of diabetes as well. And so, I occasionally, and it absolutely breaks my heart when people come and sit down with me in my clinic and say, I've been bad. And I almost want to cry sometimes, because it's like, there is no way that you have been bad. This is a phase of your life. This is what's happening. Let's work through that together so that we can make sure that, we are getting the best we can in this particular phase of life. And, there should be never a time when somebody feels like they have been bad. I know that we all do things that we probably shouldn't. We've all eaten things that we shouldn't and drunk things that we shouldn't and participated in behaviours. But remember, we all have. And it's not just people with diabetes, and it's not just other people as well. So, I think we have to be very careful when we are putting people into little boxes that, just have we think of you about yourself. Have you done these things that you are judging somebody else for doing, And
very valid point. And if I've been bad is the most common thing that you're hearing, what is a better way for someone living with diabetes to express where they're at when they're having these sessions?
So, I think the most effective way to do things, and the way I use very simple language in any of mine, and I'm a pretty simple sort of a person, so I use simple language. I try not to use fancy words, but it's just been very objective, What's happened today? What happened when you had this particular activity or this particular appointment or this particular piece of work on? What were your blood sugars? How did you feel? If they weren't so good, perhaps, if they didn't make you feel so good, perhaps we could help you make them feel better. Are there things that we can do to help improve the way that things are going at the moment?
Absolutely brilliant. And finally, with being able to talk to our whānau, so if we've got family members who are living with diabetes, what is the best language to use with them?
I think
in
it's
your opinion.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's obviously a very individual thing, and all whānau work in a different way. Some people like to share a lot. Other people don't like to share too much. I think it's a really nice balance of being interested without being overbearing. Or over-controlling, or when people are in a community situation or a family dinner or whatever, that others aren't sort of, eyeing you up the whole time to see what you're eating, what you're doing, what your blood sugar is. I mean, sure, if you look like something's going wrong, then it's good to have somebody involved who can say, look, are you a little bit low? Can I help you? But not to say, oh, should you be having that extra bit, So important that we're not judging people, because we don't do it with other health conditions. And that is one of the things that really gets me a lot of the time, is that we don't interfere with health management for other things, I don't turn up every morning when I see my father and say, did you take your blood pressure medication this morning? Because I can see your blood pressure's not right, But no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, how are you feeling? How's your day? How's the garden? How's
So
whatever?
keep it simple.
Yeah. These are, we're talking about people. That's really what it is.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. I love that. We're going to come back to you at the end of the chat as well. Moving on to you, Ruby. So many points taken from that last chat. So we're going to move into some lived experience right now. Ruby, as a person with type 1 diabetes, you will have first-hand experience of the way others talk to you about your condition. So this is a beautiful segue into this lived experience. What kind of language or phrases offend you? What annoys you? And what causes you harm?
I think really common to hear, should you be eating that? Blood boil. And also, I know often, so I've lived with type 1 now 24 years, and towards the beginning there was always a real focus on what could go wrong, and look, I get it, that stuff is important, but it felt like it's all you heard, and you can imagine how or disempowering that is for a young teenager or even as an adult, rather than that sort of empowerment in language and how do we help you thrive, as opposed to, if you don't do this, this is what you'll be dealing with. Terrifying. And following on from what Rosemary mentioned about being a bad diabetic, like I think about the 16 years of my type 1 journey, I thought I was a bad diabetic. When I think about every blood glucose test or every HbA1c, it felt like further confirmation that I was either failing or maybe I'd got it right. And I just want to, for the record, there is no such thing as a bad diabetic. We are simply people living with diabetes, and at that time, whatever that result is, it's just how we've been able to manage it based on our capacity, our resource, our knowledge, whatever we've got going on at that time. That really makes my blood boil, because there is no such thing. And I think over the years, I'm certainly starting to see a shift. There's a real focus in the health professional space of some of that language, but also I think we've got a long way to go to on the language we're telling ourselves as well. And that's a hard journey, it's a journey so when we are seeing those results, not beating ourselves up and saying, this is just a snapshot. This is just showing me what's happening right now. And I'm empowered to say, what can I do with this information? Maybe I'm just going to park then, I'll try, test again in a couple of hours. Or I can use it, can share it with my diabetes team. I might make tweaks to help me, head in that direction where I want to be going.
So just jumping back into when other people are saying things to you, before we jump into the self-talk, how do you deal with the things that people say about your diabetes? Because I'm aware it may come from a good place or a place of good intent.
Yeah. It normally
does.
does.
Really affect you, right? So how do you deal with that?
So right now, I'd like to say I'm getting a lot better at using those opportunities as, education, raising awareness, sharing. And I think if anyone is in a space to do that, amazing. But while also acknowledging that often when you're living with a long-term health condition, you're not in that space, and there's not an expectation that you are always in that space. So if someone, if you're getting, having that conversation and something does offend you, awesome if you can say, hey, hold on a minute, let's put the record straight. But if not, and you head away from that, I might then go and vent to someone, and maybe I'll feel okay to then raise it later on, or maybe I won't, and that's okay. But I think what it really raises the point of is that calling that out, changing the language should not be solely the responsibility of people living with diabetes or our tamariki or rangatahi living with diabetes, because it's a lot. This is a whole community changing our language.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you there. Now, speaking of your work with youth in particular, in your experience working with diabetes youth, how do they cope with the misinformation or the judgment that comes towards them?
As you'd expect, everyone will cope with this so differently. And depending on maybe their support network or their coping mechanism. So sometimes for our children in rangatahi, might be anger, might be acting out, could be a kind of tuning in. It could be, rebelling. It could be, what we say often is sort of, laughing about, no big deal, and then being really gutted and hurt and behind the scenes. And probably the most heartbreaking or most concerning is that then when dealing with those conversations and actually then start hiding their diabetes. No longer feeling comfortable or confident to test or inject around, certain situations.
Which is very similar to what you were saying, Rosemary, that people, if they get to that point, they don't want to come back for consultations, and it's the same thing. So it's about hiding it and hiding away because of shame or the risk of judgment, that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
This is a wordy question, but I want to read it to you word for word, so we have a really clear idea of the intention. I've heard some terrible stories of people living with diabetes being made to feel ashamed or left out because of their diabetes. Also, growing up in a family with a history of diabetes, being pre-diabetic myself, I have experienced it firsthand, so I know exactly this feeling. Many children and people are not invited to social events or have been on the receiving end of some negative comments for fingerprick testing in public, as an example. Sometimes even choosing to delay injecting or taking medication because they are so anxious about other people's reactions or comments. Is that true? Is that real? Does that really happen? What's your experience around that?
So 100% absolutely happening. And from, children not being invited to birthday parties, or you can imagine, children in the playground leaving someone out because they're scared they're going to catch it. And I question, where is this coming from? Yeah, and ultimately, so it's the language that as a community we're using that flows through. So it absolutely is happening. I was very, very lucky when I was diagnosed. I had a really beautiful, tight knit group of friends through college, and they just were not fazed by testing, injecting, and would always be like, right, jelly beans, what do you need? Glucagon, I've got it. Wow. So I feel really grateful. And I do remember, however, this was many moons ago, a friend of a friend joining us for lunch, and her face when I injected, I still remember it now, and it was disgust, it was shock, it was, horror. And I do remember from that moment I became more cautious around who I injected around. It was a first-hand experience of, not everyone is so okay or welcoming with this. And I certainly know then heading into a work setting, and I became more cautious around, disappearing to bathrooms to inject, or waiting till it was no one was around hours after eating to inject.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I feel grateful now as I've got older and maybe thicker skinned. I don't care.
It is what it
is. Yeah. But I know that for so many, especially our youth and young people, that it's such a journey, and they're not there yet. So it's so important that we are creating that environment.
Beautifully put. Love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, finally, Ruby, what do you think we can do to change that sort of situation from happening? How do we change the kōrero?
So I think it's got to start with all of us. And I think about every adult, it's 2022. We need to be using inclusive, non-judgmental language, whether it's about diabetes, whatever we're talking about, because ultimately it shouldn't be the responsibility of our children to then, have to navigate this. So it starts with us and the language we're using and the way we're talking to people, which ultimately flows through to how we're supporting people with long-term health conditions.
So education, normalising it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
opening up clearer communication, removing judgment, because it's just a part of our lives.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ruby. Really appreciate that. Megan, thank you for waiting, for being so patient, because I know you're
the quietest I've been for a long time.
You're bursting with information and stories to share. I can see it. So, Megan, I understand you have type 2 diabetes. Do you think, we're going to jump straight in there with you, do you think there is a stigma around having type 2?
I mean, what I can tell you is when I first wrote my column for RNZ, I wrote this first one and I think I wrote it about 8 weeks before we published it. And it was, I guess, 3 months after I got my diagnosis. And the night before, I rang my boss and said, I don't want to do it. I've changed my mind. I don't want to do it. And it was because I was so scared to say out loud to the New Zealand public that I had type 2 diabetes. And I was so scared of what people were going to say. I remember being terrified to tell my mum, who is also type 2. So, yeah, I think there is. I think it's fair to say there is. And I think if you look back at medical history, diabetes is one of those conditions that has been associated with marginalised groups right throughout its history. Right, as long as we've had that as a diagnosis, it's been associated with stigmatised groups. And so now it's all wrapped up in what we think about bodies, what we think about health, and health as a moral good in and of itself. Wow. And so, to say that you have this, that you are living with diabetes is, sort of to say, well, I'm unhealthy in some way. That's what people believe it is. And therefore you are in some way bad. You've done something wrong and it's your own fault and blah, blah, blah. And I was terrified to say it out loud.
Wow.
I got better at it. I don't care anymore. But
in fact, my next question to you was, why do you think people with diabetes are so reluctant to tell others?
Yeah, because I think, I remember when I said it in the second column that I wrote, which is sort of the question that I was trying to answer with the column that I have been writing is, was this my own fault? And a lot of people say, of course it was your own fault. Or a lot of people say, well, why would you even ask that question? Because you're just, the people who think it's your own fault, you're just agreeing with them. And I said to them, well, I've been being told my entire life, as a person who has been fat my entire life, that everything is because I'm fat. So it's not an unreasonable question for me to ask, is this my own fault? And then I spoke to medical professionals and I spoke to scientists and I spoke to doctors and I spoke to other people living with diabetes, and I was like, this is not my own fault. This is a combination of a whole bunch of factors, many of which I have very little control over. And so I think you know what people are going to say, and particularly if you live, I think with type 2, if you live in a body that doesn't conform to beauty standards, exactly. You've been having that yelled at you on the street for your entire life. You've been having doctors say, hey, how about you lose some weight when you go in to get a prescription for antibiotics. You've been having people tell you your entire life that your life would be different if you didn't look the way you looked. And so to say that you have type 2 on top of that is just, that's just, another arrow in their quiver. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you're in the media game.
Yep.
Do you think the media has a role to play here in choosing words about diabetes wisely and with accuracy to help inform and educate other people who are not living with diabetes?
Inform and educate, such a great line. It's such a great phrase. Yes, absolutely. And I think, I remember the first time I went and talked to an editor about what we used to call the headless fatties shot, that, when there'd be a restaurant, there'd be a story about obesity and they'd just have photos of people eating Big Macs that didn't include their faces. And I remember going to someone and saying, do you understand how dehumanizing that is for people? Do you see how gross that is? And we certainly haven't done it for a very long time, I hope. But I think it's really difficult. We try to do it with everything, right? We try to have inclusive language. We try to know what the right thing to say is. But the only way we're going to be able to do that better is by having a conversation. So as a community, as a country, as a between an audience and media, there needs to be a conversation, and that takes some of us being able to stand up and say, hey, that's gross. And then that's a really difficult position, with rangatahi in particular, to put people in to say, actually, that's gross. Can you not say that? And so, yes, it absolutely is. It's just harder than it is to say you need to just go and fix this, because it isn't a thing that, necessarily we have the knowledge or understanding to be able to do. So, in this particular instance, I get to be the one who says that headline is wrong, fix it, or can we not use that photo or whatever. But not everyone in every instance has the time or the capacity or the resources to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Totally agree. So this is a question that really makes my blood boil, and I love it for that reason. Growing up in the family that I did, and I grew up morbidly obese as well till the time I was 20, and was referred to as the fat, lazy one. Really hard, and same with my family. That language is in everywhere. So I've heard type 2 diabetes referred to as the fat, lazy disease. It's so hard for me to say that, by the way. The type that people bring on themselves. You've already mentioned, you've heard these words used. How does that make you feel?
I wish Rosemary was around when I was 20, I guess is what I would say. Look, Ruby already said it. No one can say anything to me that I haven't already said to myself. The worst abuse I've had on the internet, the worst yelling at a car from me I've had is nowhere near the horrible things I have said to myself. So I kind of that's my favourite bit with the trolls is cool, go hard, mate.
Feel better about
I've done
yourself.
worse.
Yeah.
So I think it is. It's wrong. It's fundamentally untrue. It's scientifically untrue. It's ridiculous. Where I have got to with that, I think, is as part of which is before I got my diagnosis, I started lifting weights in a gym. And the metaphor I use all the time now is I have really terribly short calf muscles, chronically short calf muscles, and they suck and I hate them and they make me mad all the time and they hurt a lot. When I do a particular weightlifting now, I have to accommodate my calf muscles. I have to use a wider stance in my deadlift, for example, to accommodate my calf muscles because I can't fix them. I kind of feel a bit the same about my pancreas. My pancreas isn't dumb and stupid. My pancreas just struggles a little bit with some of the things I might choose to do. And so instead of saying my pancreas is wrong and bad and I can never fix it, I can make slightly different decisions in the way that I live my life to accommodate my pancreas in the same way I accommodate my calf muscles. And so I think, I definitely, the fat and lazy thing I absolutely have, and one of the tweets in response to a tweet about one of my columns said, this is like asking a smoker how to quit smoking. And I thought, yes, because isn't a smoker the best person to ask how to quit smoking? Like,
wow.
and that person meant it meanly, and that person meant to say, she doesn't know what she's talking about. This is ridiculous. Why are you letting this fat person talk about health? And I thought, because I'm the one who knows, because I'm talking about my journey and my health. And why do you think you know more about my health than me and my doctors?
Wow.
And so that's the kind of where I've got to with it. I think, it's definitely there, it definitely exists, and it's hurtful and harmful. And I delayed getting my diabetes diagnosis for probably 2 years because I was scared to go to the doctor because the doctor was going to be mean to me about it.
And judge you, obviously.
And judgy and, all of those things. And so, I've been going to the doctor for 20 years, and every time they would say, can I weigh you? And I would think, why? Why do you need to know that? And now I go to my GP and say, I don't want to be weighed. I weigh myself and I understand what that means. And if I am concerned about it, I will talk to you about it. That particular one, I think with doctors, and I've talked to a lot of doctors about this, I hope you understand, I've said this to GPs, I hope you understand the harm you are doing to people when you say stuff like that. I could have known 2 years before now that I had type 2 diabetes. I could have fixed it, but I was so hesitant to come to the doctor because I was so scared about being judged and shamed that I didn't get it. And isn't the point that you want to help?
Yeah.
And you're being really counterproductive.
Wow.
I don't know if I actually answered your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely
Talked a
brilliant.
lot.
Really insightful. And in fact, you've led me into the
Great.
next one. So the final question for you there, Megan, is who do you think are the worst offenders when it comes to people speaking negatively or inaccurately about type 2 diabetes?
Well, ourselves, to ourselves. Random strangers on the internet, but we can ignore those. I do get a little bit from the type 1 community where you do see people saying, but I have type 1, I didn't do this to myself, which no one's actually said to me, but I do see. And then I think it is the way it's probably, friends and whānau, and it is that sort of, should you be eating that? Have you taken your medication? Should you be eating that chocolate fish is my most recent example. No, because it was disgusting is the answer. But things like that, I think the way we, I genuinely thought that I was going to have to be injecting insulin. That's how little I knew about type 2, despite the fact that my mother has, she's been extremely well managed for most of my adult life. But despite that, I really didn't understand it. And so I think we don't talk well about it because we don't really understand it.
Brilliant. What a great way to finish that section. Thank you so much. So we're going to do a quick fire round of all the last 2 questions before we wrap up today. So first of all, very quickly, how important is the way someone with diabetes talks to themselves? Rosemary.
Oh, it's absolutely essential, that you talk, that you are kind to yourself. You have to be when you're managing something that doesn't go away any moment of the day, and you need to be kind to yourself and you need to be respectful of yourself and recognise when, you have ups and downs, and that's normal for everybody.
Brilliant. Ruby.
It cannot be underestimated how important that is, and it's so easy to downward spiral so quickly when something you feel isn't going right. So important. Again, it's a massive learning journey. I also love to think that if we're with diabetes, it's not going away. So if I have a day where I know that my self-talk is pretty lousy, I can end of the day, go to bed, call it a day, and I'll try better. I'll try again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because it's so important.
Love it, love it, love it. Megan.
I had a conversation with my dietitian very early on, and I was feeling terrible because I had fast food the night before, and she stared at me and she said, Megan, one meal is not going to kill you. One meal is not going to completely affect your diet. And that was the first time I'd ever heard someone say that to me. And that was a massive thing to forgiving yourself, forgiving myself and understanding, I can just do better tomorrow. This is not the end of the world. And learning that bit was hugely important. I have a tip, which is I once was saying that my brain was being mean to me. And I did a typo and I was saying that Brian, and I said my Brian is being mean to me. So that voice in my head is called Brian now. And so if I have a day where I am, I didn't make it to the gym and I ate a cheeseburger or whatever it was, and my brain is telling me that I'm a bad person because I did those things, I just say, shut up, Brian. And it works really well.
I love that.
Because it is, it's those voices in your head that tell you aren't telling the truth, and you know better, and you can be kind to yourself and forgive yourself.
I love that. That's great. Say hi to Brian for me. And finally, very, very, very quickly, what kind of difference do you think it would make to people with diabetes if they were better understood and well supported in their journey, Rosemary?
I think from everything that we've said today, it's absolutely important that people are supported in their journey by everybody they see. One of the it's actually a study in pre-diabetes, but there's a study fairly recently that showed that speakers of Te Reo have better outcomes and reduced rates of developing diabetes from pre-diabetes, and cultural connectivity is the key to better outcomes, and that's absolutely amazing. So important that we are being respected within our lives, within our communities, within our workplace, whatever our situation is.
That's brilliant. Ruby.
Love it.
Do you want to, have you got context?
I think for just in regards to that question, is it allows people living with diabetes to take that ownership, to feel empowered to do that, to thrive. No matter whatever diabetes throws at us, we are empowered to navigate it, to reach out, to deal with the ups and the downs. So
Beautiful.
it's huge.
Beautiful. Finally, Megan.
I was just going to talk about that the more understanding you have for yourself and the more understanding that you have and the support people around you, the better able you are to feel empowered to do the things that you need to do with it, whatever those things are. The more really quick example, my boyfriend keeps protein powder in the house for me, which was just his way of saying, this is me being able to support you because I know you should eat a high protein diet. So he makes sure he always has protein powder in the house so that if I need to, I have a snack. And it's little tiny things like that have just made this so much easier for me.
Thank you so much, and thank you to your boyfriend as well.
He's a keeper. We'll hang on to him.
Well, ladies, thank you so much. I've learnt so much today, and I'm sure our viewers and our listeners will have taken so much from your wisdom today. So thank you very much. I'm grateful to you all. Thank you to my beautiful guests on the couch today for sharing their lived and professional expertise and experience. Now, join us again for our next episode where we will be talking about nutrition matters with nutrition experts and Chiefs rugby player and Type 1 Ruben O'Neill. So for more information about diabetes and how we can all do this and support each other together, go to www.diabetesactionmonth.org.nz. I'm Monique Bradley. Ka kite there for now.